Hi YouTube, it's Kathy and this is my September 2024 reading wrap-up. If you're not already aware, I do weekly entertainment wrap-ups of everything I read, watch, and listen to, but today we're just talking about the books. I'm going to start with my nerdy hardcore stats and charts and then get into what I read. Also, I put chapter markers in all of my videos, so if you need to skip over anything or go back to anything, all of that is down below. While you're checking that out in the description, please make sure that you're subscribed because sometimes YouTube likes to unsubscribe people for funsies. And you know, maybe leave a comment, maybe leave a like, that would be lovely. As a reminder, I will also be updating my bookish bingo board from hell and telling you about my Read Queer All Year prompts at the end of the video, so make sure to stay tuned for that. In September, I read 14 things for a total of 3,360 pages. That takes into account converting audiobook minutes to pages, so 1,297 of those pages were actually about 43 hours of audio. The age breakdown for these books was 11 adult books and 3 YA books. I read 6 novels, 4 anthologies, and 4 graphic novels. This month, the biggest chunk of what I read was spec fic and contemporary, followed by non-fiction, historical fiction, romance, and mystery thriller. If you adjust by page count, you may be able to guess the genre of most of the graphic novels. Most of these books were from the library, but I also read one from an author and one from a publisher. I read 6 paperbacks, 5 audiobooks, 2 hardcovers, and 1 ebook. The biggest chunk of what I read was in the 200 to 299 page range, and most of them were published this decade. Most of these books were by female authors, and most of the protagonists weren't female. In terms of setting, this was another US-centric month, with some reads taking place in Canada, the UK, and other worlds. In terms of diversity of subject matter, a good chunk were intersectional, but over a fifth had no discernible diversity to speak of. In terms of star ratings, this month I had 1 2.5 star read, 6 3.5 star reads, 4 4-star reads, 2 4.5 star reads, and 1 5-star read. Let's start with our lowest rated read and work our way up to the highest, shall we? My 2.5 star read this month was Forever Strong. This is a book written by a doctor, and I initially put this on my holds list at the library as an audiobook because the tagline has something to do with aging well. As I'm not getting any younger, just like none of us are getting any younger, I would like to be able to age gracefully and healthily and all of those types of things. So I put a hold on this, I was excited to listen to it, and let me tell you, it was not what I was looking for. My biggest complaint, and I have a few complaints, maybe this isn't my biggest, but the one that comes to the forefront of my mind is this talks a lot about weight loss, and that's not what I was here for. I'm talking about aging, not weight loss. Additionally, this spends a lot of time dunking on people that get their protein from plants, and I found it inappropriate, especially because she would go on and talk about people should have things like sirloin steak instead of Impossible burgers. And I'm like, if you're going to be comparing two things, compare like things. So in this case, a sirloin steak would be more like a whole food item, whereas an Impossible burger is like a crappy McDonald's burger. If you're having an Impossible burger, you know you're not taking the healthy option. You just know it's probably the only thing on the goddamn menu at this restaurant you can eat. Additionally, and I totally forgot to talk about this when I was talking about this in my weekly wrap-up, this seems pretty classist and privileged because she's always talking about like getting the highest cuts of meat and the most expensive this and the most expensive that and getting certain different blood tests like every 3 months. And I'm just like, nobody has the money for that. Or the people that do, yeah, they're probably your demographic for this book, but for the rest of us, no. Additionally, this audiobook is read by the author, which I usually love, but because of the type of information in this audiobook, aka a lot of numbers and a lot of formulas, I wouldn't actually recommend listening to it as an audiobook if you're anything like me and just hearing formulas is just gonna go whoop. On to my 3.5 star reads. The first one is Mean Little Deaf Queer. This one is a memoir about this person who grew up queer and deaf. I believe she was born either late 40s or early 50s, actually born in Germany because that's where her father was working at the time, and then eventually the family moved back to Texas. Unbeknownst to me, when I picked this up, this person is also really into theater, which I love to see because I'm also very into theater. And just in general, I'm interested to see perspectives of people that I do not currently have. So if you're like me and you'll read a memoir, even if you've never heard of the person before, this one is to consider picking up. The next 3 books on this 3.5 star list are all from the same graphic novel series, and that's Berserker by Keanu Reeves. Yeah, I didn't know until quite recently that he wrote graphic novels. And yet here we are. Also, I think it's very clear that the main character in these graphic novels was modeled after him. The main character in this one is very interesting because he is the typical super soldier type. Like, he's fighting for whichever army is the most strong or whatever that type of thing, and of course it's the American army at this point, or special forces, or whatever whatever you want to call it. But as it turns out, this character is actually about 80,000 years old, which means he's been doing this super soldier thing for a very long time. And if you want to know more about why he was even created in the first place and what his life has been like, you're going to have to read these graphic novels yourself. I read all 3 volumes back to back to back because my library had all of them, so I requested all of them at the same time, and it was a very good time. There's also a second like spin-off series to this I haven't gotten into yet, as well as a tie-in long-form novel, and I haven't gotten to that either, but I'd be interested in maybe taking a look at what it's about and maybe picking it up. I haven't decided yet. Next we have Fire Exit by Morgan Talty. This one is interesting because it's about this guy who grew up on a reservation, but when he was 18 he had to leave because he was not actually indigenous, but his stepfather was, which is why he was living on the reservation. Now he lives just across the river, and from where he lives he can actually see this woman that he's been romantically involved with in the past, who actually ended up having his daughter, but put on the birth certificate that it was somebody else so that her daughter would have status. Now he's grappling with the thoughts that he really wants to tell the daughter where she came from because she deserves to know that information. This is kind of a quiet story because we're really just going through his life and what it's like day to day to be with him and have this friend who has an alcohol issue. He has been sober for a very long time. His mother is also going through some things. His stepfather has passed. And it's one of those books where a lot happens, but at the same time it just feels like daily life. And I really liked that about it because I didn't know where the book was going to go from chapter to chapter to chapter. Next we have Death at Morning House. This one is a fun book because it's got a dual timeline. We've got somebody in the present, her name is Marlo, and when we meet her she's been in love with this girl from her school for ages, and she finally gets to hang out with her a little bit because they're working at the same ice cream place, and they go on their very first date, and then something happens and she ends up having to switch jobs. Her new job is on this island in the Thousand Islands region, and she's going to be basically a tour guide and have to stay on the island for the whole summer. The other timeline is the same island, but back in the 1930s, around the time where something very tragic happened. Through these dual timelines, you're trying to figure out what happened then and what mysterious thing is happening now. I really like that setup, and I really liked being in this protagonist's head, specifically Marlo, because we do see some different perspectives of the Rolston family, which is the family that owned the island back in the 30s. But I liked seeing her piece things together, not only for what's going on when she gets to the island, but also what happened so many years ago. One of my 4-star reads, the first one being Little Moons. This is a very short graphic novel sent to me by the publisher, so thank you for that, about this girl who is just going about her life, learning about different things on her reservation, and then one day her sister goes missing. And everybody in her family deals with that in different ways. This, of course, is a graphic novel heavily steeped in the information of the missing and murdered Indigenous women's or relatives, depending on which acronym you use. Phenomenon that's been going on for way too long in this country. And while it was really hard to watch this character going through this grief and seeing other people in her life going through this grief in their own ways, it was also really valuable. Next we have Madame Victoria. This one is an interesting book because it's really a series of short stories of what could have happened in the lifetime of this woman whose body was found near a hospital and is basically a Jane Doe, but they've called her Madame Victoria because she was found near the Victoria Royal Hospital. In the very beginning of this, we kind of get the point of view of the person that found this body and a little bit of what happened with the actual case of it. And without actually putting the name on the page, it talked about how a very famous forensic anthropologist who is also a novelist worked on the case, and I immediately was like, oh, so Kathy Reichs worked on this case because she does work in Quebec. Or at least she has worked in Quebec in the past. I do not follow her career, so I don't know. If your brain is going, I think I know that name, but why do I know that name? She writes mystery thrillers from the perspective of a forensic anthropologist who works at the Jeffersonian, and it was turned into Bones, the TV show. Although from the few books I've read, I'm pretty sure the show and the books are very separate. In fact, one of the Easter eggs on that show is the fact that Temperance, the main character, actually writes books herself about a main character named Kathy Reichs. In any case, this is not a book about Kathy Reichs. I just found it interesting that I knew exactly who they were talking about. This is a series of about 12 short stories about how this woman could have ended up in the woods at the end of her life. Some of them are much more fantastical, some of them are a little bit sci-fi. One in particular I had a little bit of issue with because the character started out as male and then transitioned to female, and although yes, that's a thing that definitely happens, there was kind of some magic going on so that like the body changed the body this person would have wanted. And given this body was found in a skeletal state and also that person fathered a child. It was kind of messy. I think it was trying to be inclusive of trans experiences, but I don't think it did a good job. But I'm also not the be-all end-all on that, so like if you've read it, let me know. Next, the romance I read this month is I'm Getting Married to Mothman, which is the third in the Mothman in Love series, and being the third book, there are certain things I can't tell you, although I think you know one thing that's definitely going to happen in this book, given the title. And that's basically how the titles of these books go. We have I'm in love with Mothman, I'm engaged to Mothman, and I'm getting married to Mothman. This series is about a girl named Heather. She's a burnt out influencer, and she decides to buy a cabin in the woods, and then she meets Mothman, and they fall in love, and it's actually a really delightful time. That's the setup for the first book. Obviously, I'm not going to tell you what's going on in this book because there's a bunch of things from the second book that I can't tell you about that are very important for this third book. This was absolutely delightful. Finally, for my 4 stars, we have The Warm Hands of Ghosts. This one is told in 2 different perspectives, but basically in the same timeline, and those perspectives are siblings. They are from Halifax, and it's set during the Second World War. The first sibling, and the one that we see the most of, is Laura, and she is a nurse. She was actually ranked, which I didn't know that was a thing that you were in the military, but apparently it was. I don't know very much about that. But she was actually recently sent back to Halifax because she was injured and she was discharged. And then the Halifax explosion happened, which took her parents, and now the only person that she has left in her life that is family is her brother, and he is missing, presumed dead in Europe. So when an opportunity arises for her to go back and try to track down what happened to him, she takes it. His chapters are a little different because you know, based on the fact that he has chapters, that he's probably not dead. However, he is spending a lot of time with this German soldier because they are basically marooned together in this place and neither of them know how to get back to wherever they should be and which side they'll be on when they get there and how both of them will live through this situation, because neither of them would have gotten out of the situation if they were by themselves, so they form a close bond. And then some very fantastical things happen, which I just want you to experience on your own because I went into this not really knowing this was a thing and I was really intrigued by it. If you're into World War II historical fiction, this is one to pick up. On to my 4.5 star reads, the first one being The Evolving Truth of Ever Stronger Will. This one is about a non-binary character, and at the very beginning of this book, their parent is dying. They didn't actually grow up their whole life with their mother. When they were very young, they were actually abandoned and they had this foster parent, and they were going to be adopted by that parent who they absolutely loved. And then their mother came back into their life, claimed that they had been kidnapped, and that's the reason why they weren't being taken care of by their mother. And basically, they've been living in a very abusive situation ever since. The one good thing that happened before their mother came back into their life, however, is the fact that their adoptive mother was able to take them through the system so that they could get their name legally changed. But of course, their mother is the kind of piece of shit that doesn't even use the proper pronouns and that type of thing. Additionally, their mother will like sit on their butt while they have to go out and work a job so they can actually pay all of the bills around the house. And oh yeah, did I mention this character is going into their final year of high school at this point? Because we start the book with their mother literally dying, and the fact that Will is a few months off of being 18, Will tries to keep it very quiet that they no longer have a parent in the household because they don't want to go back into the system. However, they do become more and more interested in trying to find that foster mother because they absolutely loved that woman and they want to reconnect. They also have a best friend who they're going through some growing pains with. They meet this new person that maybe they're a little bit interested in, and it's a lot. This is a very stressful senior year, but this is a very powerful and important book. Speaking of powerful and important books, we have The Color Purple. I didn't actually know anything about the plot of the book going into it. I just know that it's been adapted into a Broadway musical, and I had seen clips of some of the songs previously, but other than that, I knew nothing about this. This is not a book for the faint-hearted. As we start out with Celia, our main character, she is writing letters to God, and the first one has to do with her father inappropriately touching her because her mother is not available for those kind of duties. Eventually, because her father doesn't want to give up her younger sister, she ends up having to marry this guy that's really actually interested in her sister so she can go and raise his children. And this entire book is told in letters to God or eventually to her sister. And also, eventually her sister also writes back, but none of these letters are received in a timely manner. This was an absolutely wonderful book. I'm so glad that somebody put it on my 40 before 40 list because it definitely deserves its place on that list. And if you were like me and you're like, I've heard of this book before, but I don't know what it's about, now you do. And if you are able to read things on that subject matter, because obviously it is not for the faint of heart, I definitely recommend it. As for my favorite book of the month, my 5-star read for the month, that is Strong Female Character by Fern Brady. This is a memoir by Fern Brady, who I was introduced to by watching her on Taskmaster. She's a comedian, she's very funny, she's also very forthcoming and very blunt about things, and she was diagnosed with autism decades after she told her doctor she probably has autism. Obviously, watching people on Taskmaster, you don't really get their whole life story, and it was very interesting to get this one because it was a lot. Because this woman has gone through a lot of things. Also, as a complete side tangent, there was one moment in this where she was talking about when she was going to the University of Edinburgh, and I've been to Edinburgh, I used to live in Edinburgh, I was a tour guide in Edinburgh, and she talked about meeting this boyfriend who actually ended up being abusive, and that's unfortunate. But she met him in a place called Opium, which is definitely a bar I've been to, and fun fact, it's the one bar I've ever been thrown out of in my life, and it was for the stupidest reason ever. So if you want to hear that story, you're going to have to find the weekly wrap-up where I talked about it, because I already did that. I'm not going to do it again here. In any case, she is a phenomenal writer. I really enjoyed the way she brought together these stories. Also, I listened to this as an audiobook, and she read it herself, and that was a wonderful experience. So if you're into memoirs written by people and read by people themselves, and you just want to enjoy a Scottish lass talking about her life, definitely pick this one up. Alright, let's talk about my Read Queer All Year prompts. This is what the board looked like this month. For Deaf Main Character, I read Mean Little Deaf Queer. For Back to School, I read The Evolving Truth of Ever Stronger Will. For Adapted, I read The Color Purple. And for Bi Rep, I think there were actually a few books this month that would have qualified, but just to narrow it down to one, I put Strong Female Character. As for my bookish bingo board from hell, it looks like this, and there's not a lot of change from last month. I will tell you the few things that did change. In the category of pre-2000s books, I added The Color Purple, so we're up to 9, which means I just need to do one more of those books and I win that square. The Color Purple is also on my 40 before 40 TBR, so that went up to 6 books. And for library TBR veterans, we have Mean Little Deaf Queer, which puts that up to 3, which I'm still so far behind on. Do you think I'm gonna make bingo on this board? I don't know. If you want to hear me talk more about these books or other books that matter, the playlist for my weekly entertainment wrap-ups is always linked down below. If you've read any of these or you want to read any of these, let me know about it down in the comments below. On the way down to the comments, if you hit that subscribe button, that would be very nice of you. If you don't feel like leaving a comment but want to make sure that I know you were here, just leave me an emoji or a smiley face if you happen to be on your keyboard. Some people have asked if there's a way to financially support this channel, so I set up a Ko-fi account, which is a digital tipping service. The link for that, as always, is down below. You can like and share this as you see fit, and I will see you very soon. Bye!